What's up, everyone? Welcome to a really special edition of Flipping the Barrel for our very first one-year anniversary podcast.
Oilfield Unicorn!
We're both wearing our shirts that say Oilfield Unicorn for those of you who are listening to the podcast. And go check us out on YouTube too, because we now have a YouTube. But before we even get to where we are today, we want to start from the beginning, which is, it's been 12 months, Jamie.
I honestly can't believe it. I go back to when I was at your house and we set up your camera and we were like, we're just going to record ourselves and see how this goes because we love to talk. So this is just going to be great, right?
We thought podcasting was easy. I'm like, just pull out a mic. We got this. And we recorded, I think we were like interviewing each other just to get the gist of it. And we looked back at the recording and we were like, oh my gosh, we suck. This is bad.
It was so bad. And the worst thing was we were just rambling on about nothing. Yeah. Oh man, that's when you know that talking is one thing, but talking with structure is another. So we definitely learned quickly.
Definitely. So for those of you who maybe started following us maybe a few months ago and don't really know our full story, Jamie and I met on Instagram. Her husband reached out to me through my Instagram and was like, hey, I think you and my wife would really like each other. You're both in oil and gas. You both like fitness. You're both the same age and you both live in Houston. And I was like, sure, I'd love to meet your wife. I had just moved to Houston a few months earlier and I wanted to make friends. And then Jamie and I met at Bella Green in City Center and we just hit it off. Like I felt like I've known you for years and we had just met.
It was incredible. Like it was one of those things where you meet and like automatically I like knew, like I think we were there for like 3 hours and it was like everything was in alignment. Like everything Massiel speaks, I speak. Like it's just like it
twins.
Was crazy.
My blonde version, the brunette version. Like there you go. And and then we decided to start the podcast. What we did was we literally said, like, yeah, let's start a podcast. And we didn't think too much of it. We didn't know how to do it. We didn't know what equipment we needed. We didn't know anything about podcasts, but we just were like, let's Google it, right? That's what most people do. You want to do something, you have the resources to get to wherever you want in life. And we Googled it. We watched a few YouTube videos and we ordered everything on Amazon literally the next day. And there we go. We had a box full of equipment and we were ready to start a podcast.
And then that's when we started pretending like we knew what we were doing. And we started trying to use the Zoom equipment, which was pretty hilarious in itself. And then, of course, when you Google and people show you what you should be buying, there's so many options of mics. We had no idea about how to set up the mics. But then we actually got approached by an outside podcast that was interested in us. They heard about what we were doing and, you know, they had a studio, they had everything to support a podcast and they wanted to partner. And we thought, well, I mean, this is a great opportunity. It seems to align. And that was really our initial beginning.
It was an easy way to start, like full equipment, full studio, editing done. Why not do it, right? So that's what we decided to do. And a few months into it, we decided to part ways and really based on, you know, the brand that we wanted versus the brand that they were going for. And that was it. It was super simple. We just decided, you know what, it's better sometimes to just do your own thing because then you have way more control over it. And that's what we decided to do. But before we even get to that, because that was about 6 months into the podcast, when we first launched the episodes, we didn't really have anyone to interview yet because we had reached out to a few, you know, C-level execs at different companies that we wanted to interview. And I mean, I don't blame them, but some said no because they didn't know what Flipping the Barrel was. And they were just kind of like looking down of like, what the hell are these two girls doing? You know, and they didn't want to be part of it. And I think, I mean, I understand at that level, you kind of can't just go on any podcast, right? There's a lot of other things that we've learned that need to go through, you know, their marketing team, their HR team. Like there's all these things that people need to do, especially at that level. So we said, you know what, let's just start with, you know, interviewing ourselves. Who am I? Who is Jamie? Let's interview our husbands. Let's interview friends, you know, and then from there we can build up the brand and then build up hopefully to get more of the C-level people on our podcast. Because in reality, that's what we wanted, right? We wanted to get the C-level people so that we had someone to look up to.
And the one thing we didn't realize at the time is we started so quickly due to basically having everything set up for us. We really didn't do much research on how we should be approaching the podcast. We're just like, oh, we have the equipment. They're going to help us record. Let's start. So our first, or at least my first podcast about me was absolutely horrendous. It went on for about an hour, and Massiel at the time didn't know how to stop me because it was our first time, right? So this was our very big turning point on we were like, okay, we have to make sure that we actually have a time limit. But at this time too, we still didn't realize that structure would help in the podcast. We were just basically still winging the podcast and just thinking, well, we're in sales. We love to talk. We can definitely do this. This will be easy. So, and then having the support of this outside podcast that supported us, it just made it a lot more simpler because we basically just showed up and recorded, but we didn't really learn any of the back end stuff at the time.
Yeah. And I think that's something too, is we, underestimated what doing a podcast really was. There's a lot of work that needs to be done prior. And that's something that we've learned because looking back at our earlier on episodes, like Jamie said, we winged a lot of it. We would just meet the guest for the very first time and we started being like, so who are you? Tell us a little bit about yourself. And we would miss, I'm sure, a lot of their story because by the time it was an hour, we were maybe only like, halfway through his life or her life of what they wanted to share. So from there, we decided to start doing pre-interviews. So what we do is we usually will meet with the guest, whether through Zoom or in person back in the day, when we could meet people. And we would just say, okay, tell us a little bit about yourself. We weren't recording it. It was just a conversation. And we would write down everything about them. Where did they grow up? Who are they? Okay, this is a really good pinpoint that we want to bring up in his episode. And really just started to study people so that we can craft better episodes. And I've seen a huge change. I really think even the listeners have noticed how much more professional we are now. And it's just easier and better to listen to because I agree, if I'm listening to a podcast, I don't want it to be all rambling up. I want there to be a story.
Yeah, and what we've realized too is the time frame. We like to try to cut it at 30 minutes if possible because we know the attention span of most people, even if the podcast is good, you're more likely to click off. And what we've also done is with the questions that we have created for each guest, they're individual. So we use the pre-interview as a way to write the questions for the guest. That way each one is different and it also talks to their story. Another thing that we worked on is overcommitment. We had a huge problem with overcommitting ourselves. So, Massey and I are both in sales. We both have a day job that's very demanding, and we would schedule way too much stuff. So one thing we would do is we would try to record on the weekends, and then we would set high standards for us on social media posts. Like we need to post every day. And that's just unrealistic, especially when it's just two people handling everything. So we really learned that we need to stick with our time and find what's best for us. And it wasn't posting of new podcasts every Monday. It was actually doing 2 podcasts, take a break so that we can do, the back end work because we were also running the engine on the website. We write the questions, we do the pre-interviews, we do the marketing. So we really had to find, that right time frame that worked for us.
Yeah, definitely. I think like most people, when you start a business, you want to go full in, head in, let's go, right? And I think, like she said, we definitely overcommitted ourselves with like trying to bring on guests. We wanted to be relevant, so we wanted to make sure we were posting 1 episode a week, which is a lot. Plus, making sure your pipeline was full with, future guests. And then again, like Jamie said, we were trying to have a Facebook group. We had a private Facebook, personal group as well for Flipping the Barrel, for just girls that we wanted to just have like a community. Then we had our LinkedIn, individual LinkedIns, our own personal brands, right? Jamie's Instagram, my Instagram. Like we were doing so many things at the same time and trying to focus on also growing the brand. And there was a point where I think we both had a talk where we were like, hey, I feel like, we're doing too much. I'm overwhelmed. You're overwhelmed. We then decided to do some tasks where it was like, okay, let's divide this work, right? Because when you're in a partnership with someone 50-50, there's always going to be a time where one of the two feel like one is lagging. And it's really important to talk about it, which is really good. Like the second that I feel like a few weeks into it that like, Jamie may be slacking or I may be slacking, we're really good at like recuperating, talking about like, hey, I'm having a bad month. I'm overwhelmed. I can't do XXX. and we just kind of like distribute the tasks better. But it's again, it's a challenging, and it's a business at the end of the day. It's not just a hobby anymore. We want this to be a business.
Well, and I have to say, with any partnership, especially when it's just two people and we're running the whole thing, you really have to have communication, and that's in your everyday life as well. And what is so great about Massiel and I is that we're very good at taking constructive criticism. Neither one of us get hurt by anything. We're very straightforward. We don't hide anything. Like if I feel some way, I just let her know, and vice versa. And it has literally made it seamless because, like she said, if there's anybody that, if I might be posting on Instagram and then all of a sudden I stop for a week, then she calls me out, and then I'm like, no, I need to get back to it. So it's just like, it's a constant reminder, and you need that, just like you need that in your day work, like in everything that you do. So that is one thing that we would definitely like to let y'all know, is that any type of partnership that you have, just communication is key. Trust, loyalty, communication. And that has really helped grow the podcast.
Another thing too that I feel like a lot of people now are starting a podcast, right? Not even just in oil and gas, which there is a lot coming out now, but just in general. It seems like this is the new cool hot thing to do, is let's just start a podcast. And I think it's cool. We need even more podcasts because I want more stuff to listen to. But I think you need to make sure that you are going to be committed and be consistent. Because if you come out with a podcast and you post once a month, and then 3 months later you'll post, like, it's not good. You really need to be consistent. So make sure that your time frame and your commitment is there, because if not, it's going to fail. I think that's one of the main reasons we've been able to be successful, is that we've been posting, at least we started every single week to every 2 weeks. And now we're in the every 2 weeks, we take a break off. So 3 times a month, we're usually posting. So that's what works for us. And that's what works for the listeners who think this is enough for them to, stay engaged. One thing I want to talk about, like we mentioned, it was really difficult to get CEOs on at the beginning because we didn't have a brand. They didn't know who we were. But then once we got our very first CEO on, it kind of opened up the floor for other CEOs to feel like it was okay for them to come on, because, this person did it and they had a good time and people are giving us good feedback on the podcast. And then now it's like, we can literally, ask a lot of C-level, pretty high up executives, and they've all agreed to come on our podcast, which is really humbling and really cool. But it definitely took a while to get there. It wasn't just off the bat, people were going to come on your podcast.
And some of the things when you're dealing with that, when you're dealing with a higher level, executive or VP, the one thing that's very important is to work with their communication and marketing team. This was something very, very new to Massiel and I. Like, we usually just direct message people and we're like, hey, come on the podcast. But there's a whole back end that they have to get approval on. So we had to learn very quickly how to work together as a team with their communications team and their marketing team. And even some of the interviews that we ended up doing, the marketing team would actually be on those interviews. And y'all don't see them because they're hidden, but they listen into the podcast. And the first few times this happened, we got really nervous because we were like, oh my God, someone else is listening. We're not used to that. Yeah. But we adopted it. It doesn't affect us at all. But that was one thing that we really learned, is that we also have to reach out to the communications team too, to get approval. And the other thing as well is that this is where the questions really came into play, because if you're dealing with somebody at that level, they really want to know what you're going to ask them. So we always made sure to get approval on questions and give it to them ahead of time, so they kind of know what's going on and they can, get those questions ready.
Yeah. One thing that I've really liked of all the people that we've had on, especially like even the high level CEOs, there's been very, very few who were worried to talk about a specific subject. It was always like, I want to share my story and I want to be real, which was always like kind of what we wanted. We don't want to sugarcoat certain subjects, but it's been really nice because most people will be like, yeah, I want to talk about that, So,
and that's what I think is part of our brand. People know that when they come to our podcast, we are real. Like Massiel said, we don't sugarcoat or hide anything. We talk about it. Yeah. And we ask them those questions, and we're consistent with that. So with that being said, another thing that has really helped, that we didn't really adopt till probably 6 months ago, really when COVID happened, was the consistency in our marketing and having the same colors, the same cover art and just really paying attention to what you see. And this is a like work in progress, because there's still some things that we're seeing today that we're like, okay, we need to fix this. But that is one thing that has really helped with just the overall brand, is be consistent. So be consistent with your episodes, with your questions, with how you approach them, and then be consistent online with how people view you. And I think that is one thing that we definitely learned once we broke off from the partnership that we had at the end of last year. It was something that really helped take the podcast off the charts, was when we decided to go our own direction and be very consistent in our message.
Yeah, I think that's something that's also overlooked, especially because we're both not in marketing and branding, and there's a whole beast behind how brands look and feel, and yeah, and we were missing that because, like Jamie said, we were just posting random stuff online. There was no branding behind it. Sometimes we'd be blue, gray, yellow, like we were kind of all over the place. I remember we were looking at our Instagram page and we were like, wow, it looked like throw up on there. Like it was just like everything was different. There was no consistent message. And for us at the time, we didn't think anything of it. But then when you want to start working with bigger brands and get sponsorships and really get taken seriously, you need to work on your brand. And that's kind of where we took a few steps back and we said, okay, we need a new website. We need to start making our cover art better. We need to start posting on LinkedIn, at least 3 times a week. We started with 5 times a week on our Flipping the Barrel LinkedIn page, which also took us a long time to realize we even needed. We're like, a LinkedIn podcast page?
Yeah, I think we've only had it for about 2 months, and we're almost at 2,000 followers, which is really good.
We started earlier.
We should have started way earlier.
Yeah, but that's, again, part of the journey that we've been on with learning. And yeah, making sure that even when you go on our Flipping the Barrel page, the colors match, the message is there. Anything that we put out, we now talk to each other about it and say, hey, what do you think? Like, is this worth posting? Because I think you actually need to think about what you're going to post online. It can't just be garbage. It can't be mindless, because then you're going to be taking not serious. Like, oh, they obviously don't care about their brand. They're posting random stuff online and nothing makes sense. So I think that's something that we've learned for sure.
And especially when you start getting sponsorships, it's not just you at that point anymore. These other
You're
brands
representing them. Mm-hmm.
Exactly. So we really try to focus on that too. And that's still a very big learning process for us. Sometimes we still forget to put what's needed on the bottom of some of our posts, because it just slips our mind and we're like, oh crap. So we go back and we fix it. But that's all a part of what's great about, starting your own business and owning it, because you learn as you go. And just like so many people and successful people say, you don't learn until failure. And there is many times that we have failed during this process, but all it's done is we're just like, okay, we're never going to do that again. So now let's do X, Y, and Z to be able to fix that. But if you don't make those mistakes, then you never learn and you never grow. And I think the podcast is a great reflection of that.
Definitely. No, and I'm like, we are the perfect example of, we had no idea what we were doing. And you just start, right? And we always preach that. We're like, any idea that you have, or business idea, like, it's nice to talk about it, but most people just sit and talk about it for months and years. And like, one day I wanted to do this, and we just didn't think about it. We just ordered everything online the next day. So there you go. If you have an idea, go after it, or it's just never going to happen. And one thing I wanted to talk about is, a lot of people ask us what our companies thought about it, right? Like, this is a huge topic that we didn't even cover. And obviously when you're working for big corporations, anything that you do outside of work, especially if it's in this field of oil and gas, you're kind of like in their bubble. So they're obviously going to look at it and could judge what you're doing and sometimes shut it down, right? Because at the end of the day, the employer, I think, has a right to be like, hey, you work for us, you represent us somehow, we don't like what you're doing, and shut it down, right? And I think when we first started, Jamie, you asked your legal team, right? And your HR team?
Yeah, so I took a different approach because my company, although we are large in footprint, we're small in the amount of people. So I knew that it would be very quickly they would
Noticeable.
realize they would realize what I was doing. I can't like hide in the walls where I work. So I definitely took the approach of going to the legal team and just letting them know, hey, this is what I want to do. I'm not going to say anything about the company I work for. And everything that I talk about is going to be in a positive light, because that's how Massiel and I feel about the industry. But we just want to get the word out there and just reach a lot of people on, different oil field stories. So they were 100% like, hey, as long as you don't mention anything, you don't be negative about the company, then go for it. So
Yeah.
I did.
And I think it's obviously a difficult subject for a lot of companies because we're in a new era, 2020, where social media is a big thing. LinkedIn's a big thing. Podcasts are a big thing. And I think a lot of companies who are set in their old ways, they don't know how to react to this stuff. Like, is this even in our policy? Like there's a lot of new things coming out with this new generation. And I think a lot of companies just don't know what to do with a lot of this, especially with employees now having their own personal Instagrams and sharing about their companies or sharing about their work or YouTube videos, that it's difficult to handcuff everyone. And it's also difficult to make sure that no one's saying anything crazy and representing them by mistake, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I took a different approach. We're 100,000, person company. Not that I thought I could get away with it, but I just said, I'm just going to ask for forgiveness later and just go with it, because I know that what I'm doing is shining a positive light on the industry. If anything, they should thank me, because we are bringing up a lot of subjects that are really good and important for this industry. And, luckily we've done a really good job. We've had a lot of CEOs on, and I really think people looking in like what we're doing. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And we're also smart in the sense that we don't talk about our companies much. We don't mention anything about what we do at work or any of that, because at the end of the day, that's not what this podcast was about ever. We didn't want to talk about them. We wanted to talk about the industry. And I think that's why it's okay. If you start a podcast and all you do is talk about your company with your own perception, that's bad. You're going to get shut down. But we've kind of left that to the side, and we focused on what we wanted to do, which was bring oil field stories alive, And I must say, a lot of people internally have said, hey, really good job. So we've gotten very positive feedback from both our companies on what we're doing.
And I have to owe that all to us being very true to our brand. We're very true to the people that we bring on the podcast. We've had to learn to say no to some people, not because we don't think their story's great, but they just don't fit the brand. And now that we're under such, there's so many people that watch us. I mean, my current CEO already asked to come on the podcast, which is just amazing.
That's awesome.
And my boss had me do a branding awareness for our sales team. So I have to say that because we stayed true to our brand and we stayed true to who we are and how much we love this industry, it's really shown, and people know that we're not here to be negative. And I think what that's done is it's just really helped our overall perception in the industry.
Definitely. And I think before we close off, because we wanted to make this a pretty cool, small, happy anniversary to Flipping the Barrel. But one thing that I did want to talk about, because we definitely need to talk about, is sponsorships. That is something that I think a lot of people sometimes get into a quote unquote business or a podcast just based on sponsorships. Like, I can make money and this is why I'm going to do it. And I think one thing that's special about Jamie and I is we've never done it for the money. Even now, if you can offer us money and if you don't fit the brand properly and we don't think it's a good idea, we will not sell out. We will not represent anything that we don't think is worth sharing, even if there's money attached to it. And I think a lot of other industries or podcasts or YouTube videos or other influencers will do that, right? Because we live in an influencer world where you get paid to promote this protein shake that you actually think it tastes bad, but you'll do it for the money. And that's something that Jamie and I will never, ever do. So if you ever see anything on our podcast that is sponsored for whatever reason, is we truly believe in it and we will back it up because we enjoy it.
Mm-hmm. Which is why we were extremely happy when we met Leslie with PISA. Massiel and I work on the oil field service sector side, and it literally fit like a glove.
Perfect fit.
I mean, it was perfect. So, I mean, that's a no-brainer, something like that. I love what she does, and I think it fits the podcast completely like just perfect. So, I mean, we were very selective in who we choose. And the other thing I like to mention is you should never start something for the money, because we did this for a very long time without any money besides our
I
own.
think we just got a sponsor like 10 months into this. And prior to that, like it, again, people always ask us too, like for the first few months, yes, we got help. We had a free studio, we had free editing, all that stuff. But then afterwards, when we decided to part ways, everything expense wise is under Jamie and I. We put money into this because we believe in it and because we like it. So
yeah, and every episode costs money for us to produce, and we're fine with that, because even if we didn't have the sponsorship, just what we're doing and how we make people feel and just the response we get is worth it to us. So yeah, I think that's very important as well, because in order to make something great, you have to put yourself into it, and sometimes that means you have to put money into it.
yeah. And so, yeah, thank you guys for tuning in. We really appreciate you guys tuning in every week whenever we launch a new podcast. And now that we have a YouTube channel, you can actually get to see us. So that's fun too. And again, make sure you send us an email at flippingthebarrel@gmail.com if you want to be on the podcast because you have a really cool, great oil field story that you want to share, or you may know someone in your company or an executive that you also want to share. We're always looking for the next person to bring on, and we're excited about the next few episodes coming on. We have a list of like amazing people coming on. It's like the list gets better and better, and we're just like, oh my gosh, we're so excited.
We even have some alternative energy people coming on, which I'm really excited about, because I'd really love to hear their side of the story too. We are an energy podcast, so I think it's great to share all the stories. So also, if you have currently listened to any episodes and you've liked them, please comment, leave something on iTunes. We love to hear from y'all. We love all the amazing posts we've been receiving on LinkedIn. Thank y'all so much, and make sure to follow us on Instagram.
All right. Bye, guys. And see you guys next Monday when we drop somebody else's episode. All right. Bye.
Bye.